Welcome, everyone. This is Rachel M. Colby with Tattoo It on Your Heart. It's good to have you here with us. And today I'm incredibly honored to introduce you to Mr. Ray Smith, otherwise known as D. Ray Smith on some of his platforms. Mr. Ray Smith is a husband, a father, a U.S. Airforce Vietnam veteran, a police chaplain, a historian, and the city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee historian, otherwise known as the Secret City. So maybe he can tell our audience a little about that. He retired from the Y-12 National Security Complex historian, commissioner of the Tennessee Historical Commission representing East Tennessee, newspaper columnist of Historically Speaking column in the Oak Ridge newspaper, documentary film producer, photographer, public speaker, teacher, storyteller, church elder, and author. He is a board member of the American Museum of Science and Energy Foundation, Tennessee Children's Home Board of Trustees, board member of the Board of Directors of the Oak Ridge Free Medical Clinic, board member of the Friends of Oak Ridge Public Library, Muddy Boot Award recipient, United Way's Community Volunteer Award recipient, the Starfish Award recipient, Aid for Distressed Families of Appalachian Families, Bowtie Award, National Nuclear Security Administration's Distinguished Service Gold Medal Award recipient, Daughters of the American Revolution Historic Preservation Medal recipient, East Tennessee Historical Society's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, and Boy Scout Wood Badge recipient. Mr. Smith, that's amazing. I think you've lived several lifetimes in one.
Well, thank you. I probably wouldn't have sent you all that if I'd known you were going to read it.
Oh, well, you're a wonderful, kind, and humble man. And so, yeah, I figured, but I thought our audience would be blessed by knowing everything you've done and inspired, which is my hope, is to inspire us and educate us.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'll share one story with you quickly. My wife, Fanny, says that she can't tell any difference since I've retired. And I tell her, honey, I can tell some difference. She said, what's that? I said, I used to get paid for doing this.
Yes, I was going to say your idea of retirement looks like several men's work over a lifetime.
But I do enjoy it, so it's fine.
Okay, so I was wondering, would you mind telling us where we can connect with you? And I will ask you that at the end also. I know you have a website, YouTube, and your archives. So would you like to?
Yes, right. The website is draysmith.com, and all of those other links can be accessed there. Okay. And I also don't mind getting email at draysmith@comcast.net. And again, those, we have it's a video cast called Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. And that's available on YouTube. We've been doing that for about 1.5 years, every other week. And I would encourage people to check that out. If you want to look at those documentary films, you can find those at the Y-12 National Security Complex under the video gallery on that website. Okay. And I'm amazed that if you just Google my name, you get a lot of that stuff coming up. I don't know what we did before we had Google.
Well, I'm grateful for it.
Yes.
I watched one of your interviews today, actually. It was very enjoyable.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, just for the audience sake, when did you come to Oak Ridge, and why? Fill us in a little. Why is it called? Why is it otherwise known as the Secret City?
Oh, sure. I actually came to Oak Ridge right out of the Air Force. We had, I was in Vietnam in '68 and '69, and my job in the Air Force was such that after I left Vietnam, I would be able to select the next assignment, but the assignments following that were all going to be in remote locations. And I decided that was not something I wanted to do. I already had a family, a young son, and a wife. So we decided that we would not make a career of the Air Force. So we grew up in Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, and both of us wanted to get back. So I applied for work in Huntsville, Alabama, Tullahoma, Tennessee, and Oak Ridge. And then Oak Ridge was the first to call me, and I went for an interview there in the late summer of 1970, and was hired, began working there in September of 1970 as an electrician. And then I went on and through a series of promotions, eventually became the associate director of the facilities management organization there, responsible for maintaining the entire site. And the Y-12 is a government-owned, contractor-operated facility. So periodically, they change contractors. And usually when that happens, they just bring in a president and a lawyer. And the rest of us just keep doing our jobs. We call ourselves weebies. We be here before you came, we'll be here when you're gone. But in 2000, they did something that had never been done before. They brought in 100 people with the new contractor and replaced the entire top of the organization. So I lost my position. The first thing they had to do was to find 800 buildings on the site. And they made us mad, so we weren't being very helpful. And they called a meeting to figure out what to do. I went to their meeting, held up my hand, and I said, look, I know where all 800 of them are. I'll find them for you. So they let me do the due diligence study, which meant I had to go home at night and learn Microsoft Access, come in the next day and build them a database. But I did. And then they got some money to tear down old Manhattan Project structures. It didn't have a mission and wouldn't be needed in the future. So again, they had a meeting. I held up my hand, said, look, I'll make you a list. I did. And we started tearing buildings down. We tore down over 300 buildings in the next 10 to 12 years. Well, after about 3 or 4 years of tearing those buildings down, I went to them and I said, you know, you're losing a lot of history when you tear these buildings down. They figured me out by then. So they said, okay, Ray, what is it you want to do about that? I said, I'll be your historian until I retire. And they agreed to that, and they let me work for 10 years as the Y-12 historian, making those documentary films, leading tours into the site, which had never been done before. And I thoroughly enjoyed that time period. Now, when I was about to retire in 2017, I put those documentaries online so people can have access to them. And they built a history center there in the New Hope Center at Y-12. And I'm really proud that they've done that. In the process of that, I also became a commissioner for the state of Tennessee Historical Commission, and also became the historian for the city of Oak Ridge. And I'm continuing in those two roles. Of course, I retired from Y-12. But you asked about the secret city. There's a commemorative walk in Oak Ridge, right near the Civic Center, that has the 7 years that Oak Ridge was behind gates on all of the entrance roads from 1942 to 1949, March the 19th of 1949. It's when they opened up the main roads and let the public into the city for the first time. Now, it was begun by as a part of the Manhatten Project, and the place that's there now, 60,000 acres, was taken and placed as a federal reserve for separating the uranium-235 isotope from the natural uranium ore in order to build an atomic bomb. And that was a very secret project. Actually, some 75,000 people were living in the city of Oak Ridge by August of 1945, and it wasn't on any map. It was the 5th largest city in the state of Tennessee, and no one could have access to it except someone who had official business there or who worked there. It also had the graphite reactor, which is now a National Historic Landmark. That reactor proved that you could produce plutonium out of in a uranium reactor. And then they went out to Hanford, Washington, and built 3 large reactors to produce all of the plutonium that it doesn't occur in nature in any significant amount, But all the plutonium that we have in the nation today came from those reactors out at Hanford. The one here in Oak Ridge just produced a small amount for laboratory purposes. And then after the Manhattan Project was over, that reactor began to produce isotopes from stable isotopes that had been separated over at Y12 in those calutrons. Now, calutron just stands for California University Cyclotron. It was the method used to separate the uranium for little boy. It also was used to separate all of the other elements in the periodic table, some of which went over to the graphite reactor and produced radioactive isotopes that are used for nuclear medicine. Dr. Alvin Weinberg, who was the director of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for many years, was asked, what's the most important thing Oak Ridge has done for the world? Without any hesitation, he said, medical isotopes helps millions of people every year. Now, those same isotopes, that same equipment and that same process that produced the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare, little boy, that same process produced those stable isotopes that were used in the graphite reactor to produce nuclear medicine. Same science, same equipment. So that's why Oak Ridge is continued even today to be known as the secret city. It's because of the Manhattan Project.
Yes. Well, on the book I'm working on, my father-in-law and Dr. Spicer, his best friend, when they were ministers in Oak Ridge, Dr. Spicer says when they were moving to Oak Ridge, they couldn't find it on the map either. So that was in the 60s, and it was still, even though it was open, it was still
it was still kind of secret. Yeah. They used to tell people when they were coming to work at Oak Ridge, just go to Knoxville and ask.
Wow. That's amazing. And it's interesting. So the same science that stopped the worst war in our history of the world.
Right.
And, war is not a pretty thing, but sometimes it's necessary to wage war to save lives, in the end. And so it helps save lives by stopping the war. And now it's used to save lives through medicine, which is pretty awesome.
It is. An interesting thing about the way that they ran the project there in Oak Ridge is, remember, all of the young men were in the military. It was a buildup, a world war. And so they were trying to hire as many workers as they could. They found that they could hire young girls right out of high school to operate those calutrons. Now, let me tell you real quick, a calutron is a very simple physics process. You have two large magnets and a vacuum chamber between the magnets. Now, a way to understand this concept, you'll think this is kind of silly, but it'll help you understand the concept. If I had two rubber bands hanging down from my hand, I put a golf ball on one and a ping pong ball on the other, and then I spun that real quickly for a half a turn, that golf ball would stretch that rubber band further than the ping pong ball. So I'd get two arcs, okay? And that's the same thing that happens with uranium-235 and 238. There's 3 neutrons difference in the mass or the weight. So when it goes out in that vacuum chamber between those two magnets, the magnets cause it to bend. The uranium-235 or 238, because of centrifugal force, will make a slightly larger arc than the 235. So you can catch that 235 up at the top of the arc. Now, the only problem is in 1,000 pounds of uranium ore, there's only 7 pounds of uranium-235. So you've got to separate a lot of material just to get that little bit needed for that bomb. They had 1,152 batch processes, calutrons, in 9 large buildings, operated by 22,482 people. Now, many of them were these young girls right out of high school, and they didn't know what they were operating. They were just trained to turn a knob to change the meter reading to keep that uranium going in that pocket. But they didn't know that. They just knew that they were supposed to keep it on a certain reading. Now, interesting is one of those Calyatron girls came back. She worked there. Gladys Owens worked there from January till August of 1945. When the war ended, a lot of people left because they thought they were going to shut the place down at that time. They didn't. The Cold War started, and then they started making, Y-12 started making the uranium parts for all of our nation's nuclear weapons, and has continued and has that mission even today. Storage of uranium and the refurbishment of all of the active nuclear weapons. But anyway, Gladys worked there for that period, and then she came back in 2004. She saw her picture, that famous picture by Ed Westcott. Ed made all of those black and white images that you see about Oak Ridge. If I didn't have Ed's photographs, I wouldn't be able to tell the story of Oak Ridge at all. But he made the one that has the Calyatron girls just sitting there. Now, they didn't call them Calyatron girls back then. They called them cubicle operators. But at any rate, that picture was there. Gladys saw it and said, "That's me in that picture." She told the director of the museum, Steve Stowe, that, pointed that out to him, and he called me and he said, "Ray, I found you a Calyatron girl." Now, that's where that term came from. We coined that phrase right there when Steve used it. It's now a very popular phrase that's used for these young girls that worked on those Calyutrons back during the Manhatten Project. But so I contacted her and I brought her out at Y-12, set her up on one of those stools, just like she'd sat on during the Manhattan Project. And we made her picture and set her there in the Calyutron operating room. She said, "Ray, I never did know what I was doing when I was working out here. Can you show me?" I said, "Yeah, Gladys, I can show you." So I reached over and opened up one of the cabinets and I said, "Gladys, when you were adjusting these knobs," and that's what they did for 8-hour shift every day, I said, "you were changing the value of a rheostat down here." She reached over and tapped me on the arm. She said, "Ray, I still don't know what I was doing, but I know if I had any bobby pins in my hair, they just go stick to the wall somewhere." Largest magnets in the world at the time were there in Y-12, and they would literally pull the hairpins out of a lady's hair. So she still remembered what had been said to her when she went to the training program. Said this man came in at the end of the class, and he was obviously somebody important because he was wearing suit clothes. And he said to him, he said, "Young girls, we can't tell you what you're going to be doing. We can only show you how to do it. And all I can say is if our enemy gets it first, God help us." Now, she remembered that some 65 years later, and she was still concerned about what she could talk about and what she couldn't talk about. And I said, "Gladys, don't worry about it. You don't know anything you can't talk about."
That's amazing. That's amazing that those young girls were given that responsibility and that they seems like they kept the trust, right?
They did, and let me share one more. The only Calyatron girl I have left now that I can call on that I'm aware of is Ruth Huddleston. And Ruth is in that same picture. She's over on the other side, the third person back. She's sitting on a stool. And she's the one that I use now, that when people want to talk to a Calyatron girl, I connect them to her. And she tells wonderful stories about it. Of course, we have an interaction that we routinely go through to get the story told. And I'll start off by asking her, "What did you think you were doing when you were working out there at Y-12? And she'll say, "I didn't know. I was just doing something to help win the war." And I said, "Okay, well, now what did you think when you found out what you were doing?" And she said, "Well, I learned it when my supervisor told us on the day the bomb was dropped that we had made that material, that uranium that went in that bomb, dropped on Hiroshima." And she said, "I was glad because that would mean that we were going to end the war and that I'd had a part in that. And because my boyfriend was in Germany, he'd already told me that he was going to be sent to Japan to invade that place. And I knew if he did, he would run the risk of getting killed." So she said, "I was proud." Then she said, "I went home that night and I read in the newspaper and heard on the radio how many people we had killed. And she said, I got so depressed, I couldn't sleep for a week about thinking about how many people I had been a part of killing. And then she said, I finally decided that I just can't think about that. Now, for years, she didn't even talk about working at Y12 and at Oak Ridge. She went on to be a counselor in the school system in Morgan County. And then very late in her life, after she'd retired, her granddaughter came to her house one day and was working on a homework project that had been given to her. And the project was to do a paper on the history of Oak Ridge. And Ruth said, well, I can help you with that. I used to work at Oak Ridge. Now, that's the first time anyone in her family knew that. And her granddaughter continued then to say, okay, you can help me. Tell me about working in Oak Ridge. And she began to talk about it. Now, a little while later, I got a call from the largest television company in Japan. They wanted to do a documentary film on Oak Ridge for one of the anniversaries of dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. So I told them, I'd be glad to help you. Come on, we'll set something up. And a part of the things that I set up for them was an interview of Ruth with a Cayatron girl. And they became so enamored with her story about how she learned about it through her granddaughter that they changed the focus of that documentary film and made it about her granddaughter learning about what her grandmother had done during the Manhatten Project. Turned out to be a really neat little documentary film for Ruth.
Awesome. Well,
one more thought. By the way, she was interviewed by Chris Wallace, who wrote the book, Countdown to 1945. If you look right over my ear there, you'll see that book.
I was wondering what that book was over there. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah, but anyway, and when she did that interview, they became so interested in her story that more than just a little interview, there's nearly a full chapter on her and her husband, who was the boyfriend in Germany, and about their involvement in the war. So Ruth has turned into a celebrity.
Thanks in part to you. But Mr. Smith,
could I tell you just one more little thing about celebrity before we leave?
Yep.
Denise Kiernan wrote the book, The Girls of Atomic City. Yep. I don't see it right there, but it's back there somewhere. And she wrote that in 2013, but it was published. And she called me when she started to write that book, said, Ray, she'd seen that picture on the internet of Ed Westcott's picture of the Cayatron girl, same picture. But anyway, she called and said, I want to write a book about the women in Oak Ridge. And I said, sure, I'll help you. I'll introduce you to them. Well, I introduced her to one, Colleen Black. And that was all I had to do. Colleen took over from there, introduced her to all the rest of the women that she wrote about in that book. And then after the book came out, Colleen and some of those other women that were featured in the book, every Friday morning, they'd go down to Panera Bread, take their pens with them, and write an autograph. Those people would bring Denise's book by for them to autograph it. She sent me an email one day and said, Ray, you started a chain reaction. I'm a celebrity now.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you, you said the struggle, I'm sure not just of one, knowing, that there was a loss of lives for when the bomb was dropped, but how many lives were lost in World War II?
Over 60 million.
Over 60 million. So the bomb stopped that process.
Yeah.
Lives in the end.
Depending on what numbers you see, you'll see something like 70,000 killed immediately in Hiroshima, and another several tens of thousands that died later, and about 40,000 in Nagasaki, or maybe somewhere around there. But you have to remember there was more killed in Tokyo in the firebombing than there was in the atomic bombs. It's just the fact that one bomb could do more than or as much as what hundreds of bombs had done in Tokyo. So And again, it did bring about the end of the war because
Right.
yeah, of that understanding. And of course, President Truman said, you know, we'll bring a rain of ruin on you if you don't surrender. Actually, we didn't have any more bombs. We'd used up the only two we had, and it would have taken a little while to get another one.
Right. But it did stop the war, so
Yeah, that's
we're
good.
grateful for that. You had said you had sent me some of what you'd like to share with us. So what do you believe is the importance of history, why you do what you do, and how you keep at it? And you had said the methods used to best convey historical details. So want to educate us a little on that? Why is this so important to you, and why do you do it, and how do you keep on doing it?
I have found, I'll start by telling you a story of one event. I was over at the school in Farragut, Tennessee, a suburb of Knoxville, and I was talking to a group of fourth and fifth graders. And I have a presentation, obviously, that I take and put up on the screen, and I talk about the history of Oak Ridge, about how it was chosen, and how they worked, and how they lived there, and show pictures of Ed's pictures. And I'd gone on for about 45 minutes talking about the history of Oak Ridge. And the bell rang for them to go to lunch. One of the little young lady students held her hand up and said, "Mr. Smith, if we go get our lunch and bring it in here and eat it, will you keep on talking?" I said, "I don't know. It's up to your teacher whether you can do that or not." And she said, "Yeah, if you want to do it, we can do that." So they went and got their lunch and came back and sat down in there eating their lunch. And I talked for another 45 minutes. Now, that is the essence of how you get history understood, through storytelling and through the fact that you can make it interesting enough that young children will latch on and want to learn through that process. I have another method that I use now that is working really well, and that is to have the teachers in the class show a segment of the documentary film that Keith McDaniel directed and I helped to produce, called Secret City: The War Years. And I asked them to show that, to show sections of it, and have their students write down questions that they would like to ask the Oak Ridge historian. And they always use a little segment of it that's got my image in it, so they'll attach that to the story, and the students write their questions down. Then the next day, the teacher will call me on my iPhone, and we'll do a FaceTime with those students. I'll talk to each one of them individually that has questions, and I'll answer their questions and have an interaction on the iPhone. It's amazing, simple little thing that technology has brought to us that allows me to interact directly with the students. Now, I've found other uses for those documentary films. I believe the video films are the best way to convey our history. The thing that we're doing now, because of the pandemic, I mean, we started Hidden History, Stories of the Secret City. We started that in February of 2020, about the same time that the pandemic was beginning to hit. We opened a museum the last week in February, closed it the second week in March because the pandemic started coming. But when we started that, we were going to do a podcast. That was all we thought about at the time, was audio. And then we realized this Zoom situation that's coming about because of the pandemic would allow us to do video. So we've started that video cast every other Saturday. We do it and we record it and put it on YouTube. One of the last programs that we ran, we brought in Don Honeycutt, who is the son-in-law of Ed Westcott. And we had him to show images of Ed Westcott photographs that were not well known, and to talk about and describe those images. Now, that is an excellent way to communicate. Those pictures are so valuable to communicate the history of Oak Ridge to a broad audience. So as I've told you, the one good thing that's come out of this pandemic is the way that people use Zoom or some other virtual medium, but Zoom seems to be the most popular. But I enjoy teaching people about the Manhatten Project and about Oak Ridge. There are so many things that have been created coming out of Oak Ridge that people are not aware of. You know, the touch screen technology that's on iPhones, that was invented in Oak Ridge.
Wow. What else?
Oh, well, everything from nuclear energy. The first nuclear reactor training school was in Oak Ridge. And of course, nuclear medicine is the most relevant thing that you think of when you think of what Oak Ridge created. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory is still providing those isotopes for nuclear medicine. Of course, other people are providing them now too, but it came first from Oak Ridge. We provide all of the uranium for the nuclear navy so that their ships and submarines are running on nuclear reactors. Admiral Rickover, who was a captain at the time, came to Oak Ridge in 1946, attended the first reactor training school at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It wasn't known then, it was the Clinton Laboratory. It didn't become the Oak Ridge National Laboratory until March of 1948. But he saw that you could take highly enriched uranium and build a reactor small enough to put it inside a submarine. So that's how the nuclear navy came into being, was because Captain Rickover saw the advantage of doing that and went back and sold that idea to Congress, and it became a reality. Ever since then, all the Oak Ridges, all of the uranium for those reactors comes from Oak Ridge. Y-12 provides it today and has for a number of years. So you've got nuclear power, you've got nuclear reactors for submarines, you've got nuclear medicine. Right now, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory has the most powerful pulse neutron source in the world, in the spallation neutron source, doing basic research. You can do research there if you will publish your results at no cost. That's an amazing thing. And Alvin Weinberg is the one that invented the terminology big science. It's so big that private industry could not create it, but the government can. And that's where some of the major new innovative ideas are coming from. Also, there's going to be the world's fastest and most powerful supercomputer at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in just a few months. Frontier is the name of it. And it will leapfrog over the one that's most powerful today. Now, Oak Ridge has had the most powerful one before, but there's always new technology coming along. The Frontier is going to be another leap in the capability of supercomputing. So Oak Ridge has tremendous things that have come out of it over the years that we just take for granted.
Wow. Well, thanks for the education. Well, now speaking of the military, you're a U.S. Air Force Vietnam veteran. And yes, I know you have a story you want to share with us, but I also wanted to ask you, how can the American people better support our veterans, and what are some of the needs of our veterans that you see right now?
Well, my experience in Vietnam, again, was in 68 and 69. I left a small son and my wife to go over there, and our parents, we were both children born late in the life of our parents. So she had to go live with an uncle while I was gone. And that obviously is a hardship on a young family, but well, we did that. And then I spent that year in Vietnam and came back. And as most people understand and know, Vietnam veterans did not get welcomed home. And we didn't even wear our uniforms when we came home. It was a sad time in the support of our military. And I'm a strong advocate for the importance of providing veteran services to those that have endured pain and suffering that is not comprehensible by people who've not lived through that enormously impacting experience of being in a war zone. There's nothing comparing to it. Unless you've been there, you can't understand it. But I do think that it's important that we provide those services. To give you a little insight into my comprehension of what happened there, I'll tell that story if you're all right with it. Since Fanny and I retired, we've done a lot of traveling. We've been to Europe a number of times. We've been to Brazil with the Tennessee Children's Home. We formed a children's home down there and went down to celebrate the 10th anniversary of providing that service to those children in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. But one of our trips into Europe went to Paris on the Viking River cruises. And they took a busload, well, 2 or 3 busloads of us up to Normandy as a part of that tour. And we got up there to Normandy at the American Cemetery on Omaha Beach, or right near Omaha Beach. And they had there's a monument there of a young man coming up out of the water. It's a big monument. And they wanted to do a ceremony for us, especially for those people on that Viking cruise. So they wanted to lay a wreath at the bottom of that monument. And the MC asked for any veterans in the audience that would want to do that, to lay the wreath. And I volunteered, and 2 others did. And the 3 of us went up and laid the wreath at the bottom of the monument. Then the MC said, any other veterans in the audience, come up and we'll honor you as well. About 20 other people came up, and they said the standard things, the MC did about thank you for your service and how important veterans are. And then when they finished the ceremony, the man standing right next to me just turned to face me and he said, welcome home. Now that's a dead giveaway that he's a Vietnam vet. As I mentioned, we didn't get welcomed home. So I turned back to him and I said, when were you in country? He said 1968 and 69. When he said that, 2 other men standing right beside us at the same time said, I was there in 68 and 69. Now, the time stood still for me. It didn't last but a few seconds, but there were 4 Vietnam veterans standing there together. We didn't have to talk. We each knew what we'd experienced. Fanny was standing over to the side. She didn't realize what was going on, but she was taking pictures of what was happening. When we got back to the ship that night, she showed me those pictures, and she had one of the 4 of us standing there looking at one another. That's the highlight of all of my travels in Europe, is that few minutes, seconds really, that I spent at Normandy. And I've made a video of that and put it on YouTube. If anybody wants to see it, they can find it.
Well, Mr. Smith, I did watch it, and it was very moving. And the amazing thing is, I'd already seen that video a while ago. I'd stumbled upon it before I ever met you.
Oh my, you can't ever tell what you might find out there, huh?
No, so I was pretty amazed. I'm like, oh my goodness. So now I know one of the gentlemen in this picture, in this video that I saw
Yeah.
before.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Anything you'd like to point American citizens to, or a way to support our veterans, to show support, anything you'd
Well,
or
some of the best things you can do is to recognize when you know a veteran and to tell them personally how much you appreciate them. Now, there are organizations, good organizations, the Veterans Administration and others, Veterans of Foreign Wars and other veterans associations, all of which are doing good work. I wouldn't take anything away from any of them. If you find one that you like, support it. Get to know the people who are in charge and doing the work. You'll find that they are some of the salt of the earth. They are as good of people as you'll find anywhere, working as hard as they know how because of the commitment that they believe in. Now, the other comment that I'll make about the Y-12 National Security Complex, where I worked for over 47 years. Again, most patriotic people, a lot of the people working there are veterans. Y-12 even makes an effort to hire veterans, and they also provide help or educational help for veterans that want to go on and complete some college work. So those kinds of employers that understand veterans have a strong work ethic. They have a high patriotic spirit. They are good workers, and they provide that kind of support and help to our veterans. I just can't say enough good about that. I think it is very important.
Okay, thank you. As someone that is greatly invested in our nation, do you have any concerns for our country, a message for America you'd like to convey?
Yes, I do. I am just very disappointed in the animosity that's existing now between political factions. I think it is not good for our country. I think when I look back at our founding fathers, and I've done a good bit of research and appreciate many of the people that lived early in our nation's history, and I see the effort that they put into bringing into place this republic that we have. I'm saddened by those that would think that there's some major changes that need to take place with something that's been successful for the period of time that it has. I'm disheartened to see that, but I'm also encouraged to see that there are those that understand the importance of our country, the founding fathers, and what we have the potential for taking to the future for our children and our children's children. So I would encourage us to work together to bring about the most good for the most people, as opposed to spending so much energy and effort in what I consider petty arguments and fault finding and name calling. Just doesn't help. I think that we are above that. We're better than that as a nation. And I would hope to see leadership that would reflect that sentiment, as opposed to trying to tear down what we have built.
Amen. United we stand, divided we fall, one nation under God.
Absolutely.
Okay. You became a police chaplain in 1998, and I
did. I went to a program called Leadership Oak Ridge, and that's a program that's around the nation in many cities and counties. It's an excellent program. I went on to be on the board of that program, and also on the board of the East Tennessee Regional Leadership Program, and have continued to support those leadership efforts. One of the things that is required when you go to a leadership program like that is to find some time, some period during that class that you can either go attend a city council meeting or find a service organization that you can participate in, learn more about what's going on in your communities. And one of the options that we had in the leadership program I attended there was to do a ride along with an Oak Ridge policeman. So I did that. I chose that one. I spent about 3 to 4 hours in the car riding around at night, just doing whatever the policeman needed to do during that time period. And I realized when I was doing that, I realized that this person, this man or this woman, but I happen to be with a man, this person is under tremendous strain, tremendous stress. And I realized that every person they look to while they're on duty, they have to treat as a suspect. They have to recognize that that person may be someone who will attack me. That person may be someone who has just created or just had some engagement or involvement in illegal activity. They look at the world in a very different way than many of the rest of us. And then I also began to wonder, how do they process that? How do they transition from this very potentially violent interaction situation to their home life? And then I decided, well, let me look into that a little bit. I'm the idea of a chaplain. I'm an elder in the church at Church of Christ there at Highland View in Oak Ridge, have been for 33 years. And I thought I could take some of that understanding and help the police. Then I went to chaplain's training. And when I went to that training program over in Knoxville, I learned about PTSD. I never had even thought about it. Then I realized it probably was something like that, but I didn't realize that the kind of reactions that a person might have after having had a significant stressful event, especially one involving a death. So I learned that how to help people who were dealing with those kind of stressful situations. And I've been able to do that in a number of instances over the years with not only with the police force, but with the people. One of the things with the people that the police have to interact with, one of the things that a police person who's in the role of the police hates to do is to give a death notification. And that they will call on the chaplain to do. And that's our role to do that. But it's something that is very hard for them to do in their role as a police person. So I found that by that collaborative effort and that ability to help the policemen when they have that awesome responsibility of telling someone that someone close to them has either been killed or has committed suicide, something like that is a very difficult thing to do. And the chaplain can do that for them and take that load off of them. We can also be a source of encouragement to them when they have had an involvement with a shooting where a death results, because the reactions that they have to that instant is so predictable how it's going to affect them. And the fact that they need to know whatever they're feeling, whatever they're thinking, it's okay. That's your body's natural reaction to a highly stressful situation. And you're not crazy. You're not the first person that's thought or felt the things that you're thinking and feeling. Now, that kind of counseling, that kind of helping individuals who are dealing with highly stressful situations is very needed in our communities. I'm proud to be able to provide that as a chaplain to the police department. I'm now a chaplain emeritus. I'm no longer actively doing that, but I've done it since 1998 up until just last year. And I'm glad to have been able to provide that service.
A question on that. So you help bear the load, lighten the load of the police officers as a chaplain. So you take that on yourself, if you will, some of that. So where do you then take that load? Because that's a lot to carry too.
Yeah, my wife, Fanny. Fanny is she's my high school sweetheart. We married very, very young. And unfortunately, many marriages like that don't last. we're the exception to the rule. Every time we have a high school reunion, we take away the award for the one person's being married the longest. But she's my soulmate. She knows everything I think and everything I do. So we share with one another, and she helps me to bear the burdens of not only a chaplain and not only an elder in the church, but even the frustrations of trying to get our history with her understood. She's right there beside me. She understands and supports me in all that I do. So that's my release.
Okay. What effects have you seen the current climate toward law enforcement officers have on them? Have you noted effects, and how do you think we can, what can citizens do to help restore respect for authority, specifically for law enforcement officers?
Well, I think in any field that you look, you're going to find some bad apples, and that's unfortunate. They need to be dealt with to the fullest extent of the law. But the majority of your police officers are a fine cut above average. They do not represent the police brutality that has been highlighted by a few, and again, horrible incidents should never have happened and need to be dealt with each to the fullest extent that can be. But you need to realize that this wholesale impact to attack the entire police officer community is inappropriate and wrongly being wrongly used to promote political power, unfortunately. And I hope that we are just seeing a swing that will move back, and that we'll see that the importance of our police force in maintaining the safety of our cities will be recognized and supported. In all cases where you've seen the reduction of forces, you've seen an increase in crime. It's just there. It's just very easy to see. And I don't understand why anyone would think that reducing the police force's capabilities and abilities and size would produce anything other than an increase in crime. It's unfortunate that we have to have a police force. It's unfortunate that we have nuclear weapons, but for 75 years, we've not had a global conflict primarily because of nuclear weapons. It's unthinkable to have that kind of a conflict now to destroy the world. I hope there comes a time when there are no nuclear weapons, but until that happens, we're going to have as much and more than anyone and the capability to control that issue of nuclear war. Now back to the police. As long as there are criminals, as long as there are criminal intent, we need a police force that will help maintain the safety of a normal citizen who has no desire to be involved in criminal activity, but becomes the victim of the criminal because of the power that they hold if there is not an adequate police force to contain them.
Amen. I mean, that's, I mean, my heart is to uplift and, somehow help bridge the gap between, law enforcement officers and the communities they serve. And that is why I'm launching a series of interviews with police officers from around the country. And I consider you my launch, actually. Chaplain was a pretty good place to start.
I'm glad to hear that. I am. I'm glad to be involved, but I'm really glad that you're going to pursue it with the actual people doing the real work of protecting our citizens.
Absolutely. But as a chaplain and, as having been a chaplain, and do you have any ideas how citizens and how we can bridge that gap, how we can build better relationships between us and maintain?
Sure, there are, yes, there are organizations in many cities that have, that involve the police force and the citizenry. There are police academies, there are citizens group that support local neighborhoods. All of those activities that engage the police force and the citizens result in better understanding. The police force, that individuals that get to be in schools as the officers there, that helps the school kids to appreciate and understand that they're there to help them, that they're not someone to be afraid of. So any involvement between the citizenry and the police is good and to be encouraged. And if you want to be a help, then look for some way to be a part of one of those organizations.
Okay. Well, perhaps you can pass along some of those and I can put them on my website. I'd be appreciative.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I would like to see, I know, sometimes they have an annual event with the police officers in the community, and that's good, but I'd like to see something that's ongoing. It's not an event, it's a lifestyle that we're connected. So that's my vision anyway. Rather than an annual duty, if you will, I'd like to see it become part of the culture where there's connection, relationship, and respect between law enforcement and the citizens.
So I will suggest to you that the Oak Ridge Police Force does that. They are engaged and involved in every activity that we have in the city, the Secret City Festival, the events that take place throughout the city. They have an involvement, the Christmas parades. They're very visible and very much there. School activities, you see them there in all of those activities as well. So I think that's important, that there be a high visibility of not just the patrol, but also the leadership. Robin Smith, our police chief, is very open to and easy to talk to, and is very much involved in the city in activities that we conduct. So I think that kind of engagement helps people to understand the police better.
All right, you are the author of many books, and you tell us a little about them, and tell us that you mentioned the value of presentation techniques, the importance of engaging an audience when speaking. This all ties in with writers, speakers.
Yeah, I'm a newspaper columnist. I write, historically speaking, for the Oak Ridger and for the Morgan County Today. So there's two local newspapers that I produce a weekly column for. And at the end of the year, I'll take those columns, and some 50 of them, whatever they happen to be, and we'll put those into a book and publish that book at the end of the year. And then some of the books that I've published, I take a theme, like we have something in Oak Ridge called the International Friendship Bell. It was cast in Japan, brought to Oak Ridge as a part of the 50th anniversary of the city of Oak Ridge. And it has a prominent position. It's an icon of the city, prominent position in A.K. Bissell Park, a park that's in the center of the city. And I took all of the articles. I actually had a young lady who did a dissertation for a degree in college about the bell. She literally took a trip to Japan, to Hiroshima, because of her her growing up in Oak Ridge and knowing about the bell and knowing about the atomic bomb. She wanted to experience what happened in Japan. So she went over there, and she wrote each week she would send me a diary of what she had been thinking and doing that week. And I published that in the newspaper. And then, of course, later I pulled those articles together and published a book on the Oak Ridge International Friendship Bell. I've done another one on the Prophet of Oak Ridge, the John Hendricks story, the one that predicted Oak Ridge. That was a fun book to do. And I'm a photographer, so I've taken lots of pictures of East Tennessee, and I've published a number of books of those photographs. And so, yeah, I enjoy our history. I enjoy the beauty of East Tennessee, and I enjoy the uniqueness that is a part of Oak Ridge.
One of the awards you received was for the organization Aid for Distressed Families of Appalachian Counties. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, or any other
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
passion projects?
Yeah, that yeah. The Aid for Distressed Families of Appalachian County is an organization that helps the most needy in the community. They also provide backpacks for school children so that they all have the supplies that they need going to school. They help people with their utilities, with their rent, with any needs that they have, but they also teach them how to come out of poverty and help them to better their life in that way. I've been on the board for a number of years. I'm no longer on the board, but I was for a number of years. One of my best friends for several years during the latter part of his life was Bill Wilcox. Bill was the technical director of both the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant and the Y-12 National Security Complex. He served in that capacity for a number of years. He came here in 1943 as a part of the Manhatten Project. He was actually the chemist that separated and actually processed the first shipment of uranium that went to Los Alamos. And then after he retired, I wrote a proposal for him to become the historian for the city of Oak Ridge. The city council accepted that, appointed him as a historian, and he served in that role until he passed away. Now, also in the last few months of his life, he talked with the executive director of the Aid for Distressed Families of Appalachian County. I was on the board at that time. And he told her, he said, you need a way to raise money for this organization with an event each year, sort of like a gala, an event that will bring a large number of people in and will bring in money for the organization. And he said, I think we need to make that a recognition of some individual who's had something to do with the, we call it ADFAC, Oak Ridge does acronyms for everything. So we have one for that, Aid for Distressed Families of Appalachian Counties too. But he said, you need that promotional activity. And he suggested that the first one to receive what he wanted to be called his bow tie award. Now, Bill wore bow ties every day. You never saw him in anything but a bow tie when he had to dress. If he had to wear a coat or anything, he'd have a bow tie on. And so that's become his trademark. The only time I ever wear a bow tie is at the bow tie event, but that's what he wanted it called. And then he passed away before we could have that first event. Now, I was on the committee for that first event, and that executive director, Annie Cachero, she lied to me through that whole process, and I did not know that I was the recipient of the first award until the night of the award. And when I saw my two sons come walking in, I figured something's wrong here that I don't know about. And that's the first I figured that I was going to be the recipient of the first bow tie award for helping that organization. Now, since then, we've had 9 other people that have been identified each year. And the Bill Wilcox family, his sons and daughters, continue to support significantly monetarily. And they are also in attendance at the award ceremony. And then we've had it every year for the last 9, going on 10 years. And it continues to bring in a significant amount of money for that organization each year. So I'm very proud to have been the first recipient of the ADFAC Bowtie Award.
Yes, and might I say, there was nothing wrong that night. It was something very right that night. Very worthy recipient.
Yeah.
Okay, almost wrapping up here. You mentioned the importance of being an elder in the church. Why is that important to you?
Well, I think our most important relationship is with God. Our second is with our family. And I've practiced that all my life. I'm pleased to have been selected to be an elder at the Highland View Church of Christ. And I'm glad to have served there for the past 30-something years. It's a rewarding thing to do. It also has its stressors, as you will know. There'll be family situations, difficulties, sickness, illness. We're struggling with people who have cancer just as I speak. We're spending the day today praying especially for one man that has cancer treatments going on that it just doesn't seem that they're going very well. And so those kinds of situations are on my mind. And it's not just me, the whole family of the church there are gathered around and praying for and concerned about the people who are dealing with these difficulties. The pandemic has been another one. We've had people that died as a result of COVID that were associated with members in the congregation. And it's very painful to see that kind of thing happening. But again, the need for leadership in local churches is just so pressing. And those of us who have the desire and the ability to do that, we need to step up and take that lead. And it is difficult, but it is also rewarding. And again, I can't say enough about my wife. She is she's an elder's wife that I think is to be envied by anyone looking at that role. She keeps a prayer group, a weekly prayer group that she communicates with, and the importance of prayer just can't be overstressed. So it's a service that I'm pleased to have been able to be a part of.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to end with, leave us with?
Well, I'll end with a thank you to you. I appreciate you doing this, and also I appreciate what you're doing to help me to communicate the history of integration in Oak Ridge. The fact that you have the connection to James Spicer and are able to use that material that he wrote and your personal connection there, I think will give a broader and better, deeper understanding to the city of Oak Ridge and any that reads Historically Speaking to read about what you're writing. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate you taking that on, and I look forward to your next installment.
Oh, I'm sweating and praying.
No pressure.
Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Very, very glad to do
I-
it. It's been good.
Yep. And I'm not a veteran, certainly not a Vietnam veteran. So I hope it's okay to say not only thank you for your service, but welcome home.
Yes, very much so. Thank you for that.
And I praise God for the gift of you that you are to so many, that you have been, you are, including to my life. Thank you. Pray God's richest blessings on you and everything he has you to do. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching or listening. This is invite you to check out Mr. Ray Smith, otherwise known as D. Ray Smith, at draysmith.com, correct? I will
Yes.
put the link to that and others on the blog when it goes up, and this will be embedded on there and also on the YouTube. So this is Rachel M. Colby inviting you to tattoo it on your heart, walk it out in your skin. Stop by and check out my other interviews with pastors and veterans and upcoming interviews with law enforcement officers around the country. Yes, I'm looking for candidates. There's also lots of content to encourage you in your Christian walk and also motivation for writers and more. I invite you to subscribe at tattooitonyourheart.com. And thank you again for watching and listening, and God bless you. And thank you again, Mr. Smith. God bless you. Thank you.
And thank you, and God bless you.